Hey everybody, this is Don with Wizard Tower Games, and thanks for tuning into my video today. I'm going to talk today about Gary Gygax, and do I think Gary Gygax expected players to follow the rules of D&D? Now, I think this is kind of a two-part way of looking at this. You have to look at this in the player's standpoint, the player characters, and then the DMs. And real quick, this is part of a four-part video series with in partnership with Joe BLOCH, the GREYHAWK GROGNARD, Eric TENKARS from TENKARS TAVERN, and Joe the Lawyer. And basically what we're doing is we're sharing weekly a Friday topic. And this week's topic is, did Gary Gygax expect you to follow the rules? And we're kind of sharing our videos and such on YouTube, and we're going to be doing a couple of lives. We've already done one. We got one more coming up later on this month. So this is kind of like my take on it. Links to Joe Lawyer's, Joe BLOCH's, and Eric TENKARS' YouTubes are in my description. My apology about missing last week. That was a rookie mistake on my part. I should have put their links in there, but they are this time. So really, I think you have to kind of look at it as two things. What did Gary expect you to do, and what did Gary not expect you to do? Now, I think what Gary did expect is Gary expected that basically the Dungeon Master was meant to be the final authority, you know, the final arbiter, the final decision maker. I really believe Gary thought that, because really when you take a look at it in Gary's books, especially first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, he repeatedly framed the rules as basic tools that are for the DM, that are in the DM's hands. And I think he expected, he's pretty vocal about what he expected DMs to do. And that is, number one, he expected DMs to adjudicate the situations or unexpected situations that came up. He expected, I believe, DMs to change or add rules where needed. That's kind of like where you get to ad hoc rule making, table rules, that house rules, that kind of thing. And I think he really emphasized ruling over rule referencing. And then also he expected DMs to adapt the game to their own campaign world. So really, I think he absolutely expected rules to be bent, ignored, and or customized by the DM, but not by the players. And I think that's pretty obvious when you look at something very basic that I'm going to get into here in a little bit with my video here. You know, as an example, the best way of putting this for me would be, you know, I think he expected table-to-table variation. Because if you look at the early versions of D&D, that grew out of tabletop wargaming, miniature wargaming. And in its earliest forms, D&D was very open-ended, very, very loose. And I think Gygax knew that with this type of loose rule system and looseness of the rules, that people would hack the game, you know, hack the system, hack the rules, if you will. I think that he expected players and many GMs to use house rules. So I think he expected house rules to kind of proliferate through gaming when playing D&D. And I think he understood that different gaming groups would game and play differently, just the nature of the game. And I think he saw that very early on. And you know, it's obvious that he clearly encouraged creativity, experimentation, you know, making the game your own, if you will. And that's actually become kind of a tradition of our hobby. You go to any gaming group and on Facebook, and you hear people all the time asking the question, what are your house rules? You know, what rules have you changed? And that's what has made D&D unique, is the ability to change the rules, and you're not changing the spirit of the game. You know, you can't do that with Risk or Monopoly or Stratego or Axis and Allies. Really, D&D is uniquely that, and that's, I think, one of the key reasons why D&D became as popular as it did. And I think also you have to look at, what did Gary not expect or endorse when it came to D&D, and I think that revolves mainly around players, the player character. In fact, I think Gygax even criticized players who basically use rules lawyering, to get extra powers or advantage. I don't think Gary was a big fan of Monty Hall campaigns. I think he made that pretty clear in his various online interviews and such. And then plus, I don't think Gary really liked the idea of players exploiting loopholes in the game to get an advantage. I just don't think that, Gary saw any value in that. And also big time, and it's a big thing with me, is Gary really despised players cheating on their dice rolls when creating player characters. Matter of fact, I highly penalize player characters that I catch cheating on their dice rolls. In fact, most time if somebody is doing it and becomes a problem, they'll be out of my game. But on the flip side, I think he valued player cleverness and problem solving, but not breaking the rules to win the game. Excuse me. And I also think with AD&D, and I think when he developed AD&D, he tried to develop the game specifically to reduce the chaos of the game, if you will. Because let's face it, like I said earlier, earlier versions of D&D, the white box and wood grain, et cetera, was really loose. It almost had like a kit bashed on the fly feel to it. And when Gary developed Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, I think his intent included some things like he wanted a more standardized set of rules for convention and tournament play. He liked convention and tournament play. He really liked that. I think he saw the value of what a game, convention, and tournaments can do for the game as a whole. I think he created it also because he wanted more clear procedures and definitions of the game and some things within it. I think he wanted less reliance on like ad hoc rule interpretation. And I know that is weirdly paradoxical because I'm kind of saying one thing now, but I was saying something earlier. But I think when you look at it in that way, early D&D, early Dungeons and Dragons rules were guidelines that were designed, hack away at it, modify it, etc., etc. AD&D used the rules as written so everyone's talking about the same game. So I think what Gary Gygax expected was he expected the DM to alter and improvise rules. And I think he expected DMs at their tables to create house rules and apply those house rules and their unique styles in the game. But also, I think when it comes to players, and I think this is the important distinction, I think he wanted players to think creatively within the rules. And he didn't want, though, players breaking the rules to win, ignoring the referee's or DM's authority, and also cheating or exploiting technicality, the rules lawyering thing. And I really think that you kind of get back to the core thing about what I was talking about earlier about, there's a couple of really easy ways of kind of proving this. And that is when you take a look at the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook, think about what they're called. The Dungeon Master's Guide, it's a guidebook. The Player's Handbook is the handbook of rules. There's a reason why the Dungeon Master's Guide has most of the same material as the Player's Handbook. But the Player's Handbook does not definitively have anywhere near the information that's in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Because the Player's Handbook is just that. It's their handbook of rules that players are supposed to follow. The Dungeon Master's Guide is just a general guide to the game that's designed to give DMs the basics that they need to play the game. But like even what Gary says within the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically says that Dungeon Masters are encouraged to write their own rules and change the rules in the book, but if you're going to do it, be consistent. But nowhere in the Player's Handbook does it say anything near that. Nowhere in the Player's Handbook does it say that players are encouraged to modify the rules and not follow the rules. Because again, like the Dungeon Master's Guide says, and even the Player's Handbook gets into, is the Dungeon Master runs the game. You're the Dungeon Master. Okay, you're the game master. Okay, you create the game. And if you don't like how, like I'll give an example, go back to the rolling the dice for player characters. All kinds of people have all kinds of different ways. Now there's a set of listed ways that you can generate ability scores within the DMG and the Player's Handbook. but also players adapt that. They change that. I know people that automatically give players an 18 on any ability score they want, and then they can roll whatever to gain whatever, whatever the DM feels. There's DMs out there who modify or change the, combat rules in it. I've done that a little bit with my version of D&D. So I think really when you look at Dungeons and Dragons as a whole, I think Gary did expect the Dungeon Master to change the rules, but I think he expected the players to follow the rules because, again, one of the key rules of D&D is the DM rules the game. The DM is the arbiter of that game, and the DM is the one who runs the game, and the players follow the DM's lead. They follow the DM's rules. So that's my take on the game, or not game. Excuse me, the question of the week, Friday. I want to thank Eric and Joe 1 and Joe 2 for having me on. I appreciate it. Again, their links are down in the description of this video. Please go ahead, like, subscribe. We right now are collaborating our videos, so if you like my video, they'll get a like. If you subscribe, they'll get a sub. So like and subscribe our videos. Help each other out. Help us all out. And this is Don with Wizard Tower Games, and I'm talking about, did Gary Gygax expect you to follow the rules? So have a good weekend.